Good morning, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Ricardo Bosi, National Leader of Australia One. Good to see you. Thank you for joining us. As you can see, we have Australia's favourite ex-communist, John Wilson, now a man of God and fighting the good fight for all Australians to remove this belligerent occupation. Now, our special guest today is Chris Sky, human rights activist and international businessman. Now, we'll meet Chris shortly. Nothing stops Chris. This guy is unstoppable. He will just keep moving forward regardless of the challenges, and he's faced many, legal and otherwise, in this journey to free the planet. Now, he's an international traveler as well. We're speaking to him today from Istanbul, Turkey, and he's made time, put time aside to speak with us, to give us an update on how things are going around the planet. Chris, good afternoon, good evening. How are you, mate?
Yeah, I am fantastic. It's 7 o'clock.
So you're in Istanbul. You're in Istanbul.
I'm in Istanbul right now. I'm going to be here. I'm going to be in Colombia. I'm going to be in Mexico, and then before I'm heading back to Canada, because I'm setting up some business opportunities and hopefully some real estate opportunities as well. Because unfortunately, it seems like it's time to get the hell out of Canada. Australia is probably the only other country in the world I can think of that's almost in as bad a position of Canada. And what do I mean by that? I mean by economically, and I mean by so far down the World Economic Forum agenda, we're almost at the point of no return, barring a full-scale revolution of the government. So I can give you some stats right now. We currently are almost as bad as you with debt to GDP ratio. We are over 100%, almost 100% debt to GDP ratio. But it gets scarier when you look at the makeup of that debt. We're only around 150 years old as a country, and it took us 141 years to get the first $1 trillion of debt, and only 16 years after that to double that to the over $2 trillion of debt we have now. We are currently in a recession, and the government's just keeping completely quiet about it. And they keep telling everybody how they're adding all these jobs every month for the employment numbers. But when you do the nitty gritty and you see every job being added is a government job. So it's not adding to our GDP, it's actually taking from our tax dollars. It's actually so bad that if you look at how fast the private sector is growing compared to how fast the government is growing, the government is outpacing the private sector 4 to 1. Or 400% more than the private sector, which is already mired in a recession. We are using so much of our annual revenue to run our bloated and disgusting government that a healthy number for this statistic is somewhere around 20, maximum 25%. In Canada last year, we hit 41% of all our annual revenue is being spent on the government. And what did Trudeau do to remedy this situation? He created a budget with an extra $40 billion deficit. And when they give you a $40 billion projected deficit, you know it's usually going to be twice that amount. So they're doing everything they can to raise inflation and cost of living in Canada. And there's a very good reason for this. They want to bring in UBI. They want to bring in digital ID. They want to bring in a mandatory vaccination bill and tie all three together to create the social credit score for Canada and complete control of Canadian citizens. So how are they doing it? It's very, very simple, and it works very, very well because they're targeting a small percentage of the country while targeting the whole country at once. And what do I mean by that? They are artificially putting us in a situation where every single year from now, Canadians can expect around a 30% increase in cost of living for all their basic needs, housing, food, electricity, gas, etc. They've also told people that own homes that they can expect their mortgage rates to climb by around 60%. So what's that going to do? Every year, you're going to see Canadians having to tighten their belts, make some sacrifices, and get used to having less and less. But the bottom 5% of our society economically is going to lose their homes. They're going to become renters instead of owners. And that is the goal. They want you to own nothing and be happy. And with a 30% cost of increase every year, you're going to see around 5 to 7% of the population losing their homes and becoming renters, which means over 90% of the people aren't going to be in the streets rioting and screaming and helping them. They're just going to be happy that they're holding on to whatever they got, because Canadians are already the most apathetic and tolerant people on planet Earth. Now, they realized that because we're so much in debt and because there's really no wealth left in Canada, they've closed more businesses in the first quarter of 2024 than they did in the entire than the pace of the entire pandemic. We broke the records for business closures, and the recession is set to go for another at least year and a half. And if you look at Canada's economy on the OECD index, which are the petroleum companies that have some of the best economists in the world, Canada is rated as one of the top 38 most advanced countries in the world. And their projections for our economy is for Canada's economy to fare dead last out of all 38 countries for the next 40 years straight. So for people that think, oh, it's going to get better, it's definitely not going to get better. And every single year we have a very large population of people 55 plus and reaching senior citizen status, almost 30% of our population, and most of our white and Canadian population are elderly. And they're not going to be able to count on their pensions to make ends meet. So what's the last vestige of wealth left in Canada? It's the private wealth owned in private ownership and private business. So with the extended cost of living that they're going to have, 30% a year, basically doubling the cost of living every 3 years, you're going to see massive amounts of people losing their homes. And all the older people, there's going to be a brand new $1 trillion industry in Canada and the US. It's called a reverse mortgage. Just like everybody has to use a mortgage to buy a property, now it's going to become just as common for a senior citizen to have to use a reverse mortgage to keep their property. And when the time comes and they actually pass away, there's going to be so much debt left on their property that the banks is going to be able to sell it off to companies like BlackRock at like a fraction of the cost, and their kids are not going to have the income to try to buy these houses back. And all these kids are counting on, and I say kids, they're older than me, all these kids in their 40s and 50s are counting on their parents to pass down these houses to them because they know there's no other way they can get in the home market. So they're going to steal all the older homes with the reverse mortgages, and they're going to steal all the middle-aged people's homes through the increased cost of living. Next year, we also have an election. Mr. Pierre Poilievre is virtually guaranteed to win this election. Not only is he even more staunch Zionist than Trudeau and supports Israel's invasion and genocide of Palestine unequivocally and will send unlimited money to Israel and Ukraine, one of the first things he's going to pass is the digital ID. And they know how to work on the conservatives' minds. So they're going to come in with a moral standpoint. They're going to come in and say, oh, we just want to pass digital ID for online porn because we want to keep kids out of online porn. So all the conservatives are going to be like, well, that sounds like a great idea. We don't want kids on porn. And as soon as the digital ID gets passed for online porn, now all of a sudden it's going to be for social media. It's going to be for your job. It's going to be for everything else. And that's phase one of the trap. With the increased cost of living that we're seeing, every 3 years basically doubling, I believe in my head they're going with a 3 cycles of 3 years. And by the end of 9 years, virtually all the people are going to be renting instead of buying. And the vast majority of people are not even going to make ends meet. And that's when they're going to pass Bill S-233, which has already passed its second reading in the Senate. And S-233 is a basic, universal basic income, but it comes with strings attached. Forced vaccination, forced medical interventions, virtually whatever the government wants you to do, you will have to do it. Not only to collect your UBI, but to collect your paycheck, collect any insurance benefits, and even collect your pension that you have been paying into your entire life. So what we're seeing is the implementation of taking people's wealth, taking people's private property, and forcing them onto a Chinese-style social credit system where they are now completely at the government's dependency to be able to survive. And at that point, Canada's pretty much finished. And they know this. And they know Canadians are going to be mad at that point. So what are they doing? Everybody's been worrying about, oh, they're going to bring in UN soldiers to Canada and they're going to use foreign troops against us. Well, they were half right. Canada has now made a new law that you do not have to be a Canadian citizen to be part of the Canadian military. You just need to be a permanent resident. So out of the 1 million plus third worlders that they're bringing into Canada every year, and they're not bringing in the best and brightest from these countries, they're bringing in the worst and worst of these countries. As soon as they bring them in and we pay for them, they give them a permanent resident card. We already saw this year 21,000 non-Canadian permanent residents become Canadian military soldiers. 41% of them from India, some from China, Brazil, Nigeria, Jamaica, and my personal favorite, 8% of them are from countries unknown. How the hell can you have somebody come from a country unknown, give them a permanent residency status, and then give them a Canadian military uniform, training, and a rifle? And if they continue that pace in the 9-year cycle that I say that they're trying to use, by then they're going to have an army of over 200,000 Canadian military that were not only not born here, have no relatives here, and no ties and no loyalty to Canada. So we're talking about them setting the stage for exactly what Klaus Schwab and his minions have been talking about. And Canada is by far the furthest down this rabbit hole. And that's why I said, barring an actual revolution, and not a revolution of thought, a revolution of actual action, there's no way that they're going to stop this. Because we would need to cut our government virtually in half, cut our government spending in half, create a budget surplus of between 50 and 100 billion dollars each year to start paying off our debt and to kickstart our economy back to where it needs to be, growing. So everything that's happening is sinister, and it's not by accident. People think Trudeau is an idiot. People think the government's stupid. They know exactly what they are doing. They are following the marching orders of the globalists above them. And Canada is serving as the model for the rest of the world. It is the most successful experiment they have had thus far, because Canadians are the youngest and the most tolerant and most obedient humans on planet Earth. So I'm trying to set the stage for a debate right now. I don't know if you guys know who Jeremy Mackenzie is. They call him the Raging Dissident, and he's in Canada. And he's been telling everybody, oh, we can't leave Canada. He's a veteran. He's an army veteran who was drafted and sent over to Afghanistan to kill innocent women and children. So the same Zionist entities that are destroying Canada, destroying Australia, who were paying him since he was 16 years old, could now control the heroin trade in Australia. And wouldn't you know it, now we have an Oxycontin and other heroin-based epidemics in Canada. So Jeremy Mackenzie knows that I'm probably the main opposition, and I've been telling Canada there's only 3 choices. You can stay in Canada, be compliant, let them take your freedom and your prosperity piece by piece until you become a technocratic and literal slave. The second type of people in Canada are the ones that believe they're going to fight back. And by fight back, we have people that think they're going to live within the cities but outside the system by making money illegally, like drug dealing or prostitution or things like that. And then you have the other side of the coin where people think they're going to create these little villages and communes off grid and be able to survive, and the government's just going to leave them alone. In reality, those people are going to become the target once they already have Canada enslaved. And I label number 1 of the majority of people that are just going to let everything happen, the slaves. The number 2 people that won't let themselves be slaves but aren't have an effective solution are going to be called the sacrifices. And then you have people like me that have been advocating that if you want a more prosperous life for you, your family, and your children, just like 99% of Canadians were not born in Canada originally, they all came from other countries because their ancestors saw that whatever country they were in was no longer prosperous and no longer had a future. We now have to do the same thing in Canada, and we have to emigrate to other countries. And what we are seeing so far is a record number of Canadians leaving Canada. And we're talking about the smartest people, the people with money, and the people with foresight. So the best and brightest are leaving Canada in record numbers. So the chances of a revolution and or chances of it turning around become even less. And they're going to places like Mexico, Costa Rica, Panama, places like that that are on the come up. Mexico is going to be a global powerhouse within the next 5 years. Their currency is the strongest performing fiat currency in the world the last 2 years. To give you an example, I'm a permanent resident in Mexico for a couple of years. 2 years ago, it was 17.5 pesos for a Canadian dollar. Now it's already 12 pesos per Canadian dollar, and that's only in 2 years. And Canada is going to go even further down the tubes. And it's not like we have a euro that's worth a lot of money or a pound that's worth a lot of money. Our Canadian currency is 50% less than the euro and 73% less than a British pound. So Canadians are literally by far in the worst situation. And it got to the point where I wanted to challenge Jeremy to a debate about this. And he was doing everything he could to avoid the debate. He actually called me out on social media and said, I don't want to debate you because you're too stupid for me. I'm too smart for you. So instead, I want to have a fight against you, trying to literally cut down the constructive argument and just turn it into some kind of physical battle. And me not being afraid of anybody, I told him, sure, I'll fight you after we have our debate. So to prove to the world that he's a coward and a liar, just like most people who are against what I'm saying, I literally met with a lawyer last night to create a contract, a legal contract in writing, to have this national debate set up with a live audience broadcast around the world, where I'm going to tell people what's wrong with Canada, where it's going to be in 5 years, where it's going to be in 10 years, and he's going to have to try to convince people why they should stay. And the second part of the contract is that we're going to have a UFC style MMA fight after the fact. Now, people think this is about ego. People can say that whatever they want. To me, the fight means absolutely nothing. Being able to knock out Jeremy or any other Canadian or any other person in the world is highly irrelevant. It's all about the debate. And I want to get it out there, not just to Canadians, because it might be too late to save Canada, but when the rest of the world sees me lay out step by step what they are planning on doing to us and how it's going to affect us in the short and long term, and then they see it actually happening, just like my COVID predictions, well, maybe, just maybe, we can turn things around for the rest of the world and we can stop this madness from happening. So I'm once again putting my life and even my fists on the line for fight for my country. And I believe that it's going to be the best strategy because it's going to get a lot of people's attention. It's going to be very well promoted. I also put a clause in there, by the way, just so people know, because everyone thinks people are about money, that we are allowed to sell tickets to secure the venue and get all the equipment we're going to need for both events, the debate and the fight. But any extra revenue that is generated, half is going to go to Mr. McKenzie, half is going to go to myself, and we have to donate it to our favorite charities. I do not want to make 1 penny off this, and I definitely don't want that scumbag making 1 penny off of this. So we are setting the stage where we are going to be a beacon of hope, and hopefully not an example set by the World Economic Forum for Canada and the rest of the world. So that's what I've been organizing for the past little while. And I believe it's very important because everything that I just told you about is not conjecture. It's not speculation. It's not my opinion. It's 100% facts. The laws for the universal basic income, the laws for the mandatory vaccination and digital ID are already in the system. They're already made it through their second readings, and they're not changing anything about it. And if that wasn't bad enough, in pure dictator style, Trudeau is creating 2 new laws. The first law is about misinformation. So they want to stop people like me from being able to do protests, because I did protests all over Canada, all over the US, Mexico, Netherlands, United Kingdom, Ireland. Haven't been to Australia yet, but they're making a law that states if the government feels like you might tell people something that they can classify as misinformation, they do not even need to charge you with a crime, and they can put you on house arrest and confine you there with an ankle bracelet because they think you might say something that they don't like. This is pre-crime, straight out of Minority Report with Tom Cruise, and it's designed to limit people like me from being able to fight back. The second law they're going to bring out, and they're going to do this when Poilievre takes over, is a so-called anti-hate and anti-Semitism law. So if you're against their entire LGBT agenda, where countries like Peru are declaring transgender people mentally ill, in Canada, they have an entire police division of transgender officers. And they actually use our tax dollars to give them special police cars with the rainbow flag logo on it. So you'll drive by a police car, it'll say LGBT on it, it'll have a rainbow on it, and you'll see a 6'3" black guy driving with a blonde wig and makeup on. And that's how they're treating Canadians. And as everybody knows, our Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, is a known pedophile. he had to pay a $2.5 million settlement suit for having sex with a 15-year-old girl that he met at the school where he was a part-time drama teacher. So he went from pedophile part-time drama teacher paying a $2.5 million lawsuit to being our prime minister for the next 8 years. And we wonder why all these new laws are coming out that are pro-LGBT and not protecting children. And guess what the hate crimes law is? If you do a so-called hate crime, and the definition of hate is very broad and expanding in their favor every single day, life in prison for saying something the government doesn't like, and house arrest with an ankle monitor without even being charged with a crime if they can say that they believe you're going to say something you don't like. So you put these laws together with the economic conditions and the new laws that they're bringing out to create dependency and social credit score and UBI on government. And then there's two more things that we have to add into the equation. Number one is AI. Already AI is advanced enough that it's taking millions of people's jobs. For instance, I can buy a $200 piece of AI software that does voiceovers, and it can do male voices, female voices, children's voices, and 30 different voices. And 99% of people cannot tell this is AI. They believe it's a real person. That's a $5 billion industry where the average person makes around $60,000 a year. Those jobs are going to be completely gone. And that's just one example of probably, if I sit here, I could give you dozens or even over 100 examples of how people are going to be losing their jobs, losing their livelihoods, and becoming more dependent on government. And if that wasn't bad enough, we have this whole thing with the COVID vaccine. Some people in Canada are on booster shot number 7. Now, I don't care how much you believe in science. Everybody knows that even if it doesn't kill you right away, every single vaccine you take is lowering your overall lifespan. We also have an epidemic of autism in Canada, and they try to pretend it has nothing to do with vaccines. But I'm going to bring up a country like Japan right now, for instance, because just a few days ago, the most senior cancer scientist in Japan did a study where he now confirmed that the turbo cancers, and that's a new word, no one's ever heard of turbo cancers before, but they're cancers that between the time of diagnosis and your death is a matter of a few months. And every single person that's getting these turbo cancers is getting it from the vaccine. He called the vaccines a work of evil and said that they need to be investigated before they ever inject them into anybody else. And Japan is unique. In 1980s, like many other countries, they introduced the mandatory MMR, measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine for children. By 1993, so many children were having problems, including brain damage, aka autism, that they actually made the MMR vaccine illegal in Japan. And now you have to get a measles, mumps, and rubella shot all separately at all different times. And what's the result? Their rate of, and in Canada, by the way, let me get, I almost misspoke there. In Canada, you can only get the MMR vaccine from any of the big pharmas. They can all make them individual, but they force you to give your child the MMR vaccine along with the whole host of other vaccines. And now they admit that 2% of every child, or 1 out of 50 children in Canada, is autistic. Versus Japan, that is a 1,300% increase of autism versus the country that banned the MMR vaccine. But people like me are so-called conspiracy theorists if we try to make any type of connection to the vaccine and brain damaging children, or the vaccine or the COVID vaccine and cancers, blood clots, heart problems, dying suddenly, and everything else we've seen. So we are in a literal shit show. I don't know if I can say that word on here, but they are coming at us from all angles, economically, lawfully, with so-called health, and they want massive dependence on the government. They want you as sick and unhealthy as possible, and they want you as uninformed as possible. So now that I'm letting all this out of the bag and I'm set to have this massive debate that's going to be seen by people all around the world, I was already target number 1. Now I'm going to be target number 1 plus. So it's going to be a very interesting few months for me. This is why I'm not even in Canada, and I'm actually doing things to set myself up in multiple countries around the world, which, by the way, I advocate for everybody to do. In the post-COVID world, where they can put you on travel restrictions like that, I believe everybody should be what I call internationally nomadic. You should be collecting passports and residencies for other countries as fast as you can, because they're going to try to lock us down again. They are going to try another pandemic, and I can already tell you what the next pandemic is going to be. It's going to be a bird flu pandemic. They're already talking about how they have to cull tens of millions of birds around the world. They're already talking about how bird flu has made the jump to mammals, and you have all these different mammals dying around the world. They already created bird flu tracker apps so people can see how scary and bad it is. And we all know that bird flu isn't like COVID. Bird flu, you have a 1 out of 2 chance of dying. So if they start vaccinating the entire population with something like that, and it has the same effect as the COVID vaccine, we're not going to see thousands to hundred thousands of deaths. We're literally going to see billions of people dying. And we know that is their plan, because it was written on the Georgia Guidestones that they want to reduce the population to 500 million people, which, by the way, they blew up now, so you can't even go and see it and prove all of this. So there's the situation in Canada. You guys are almost as bad as us. I forgot the one thing in Canada that makes us worse than you. We have 0 gold reserves. We don't even have 1 ounce of gold. You guys have something like 50 tons, which is already really low. The United States has, they say, 8,000 tons. China says they only have 2,000 tons, when in reality they have between 15 and 30,000 tons. And the reason China will not declare the amount of gold they have is very simple. They also hold around $2 trillion in US dollars. Even though the US dollar has lost its official status as world reserve currency now that BRICS is out, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, with 10 Southeast Asian nations joining BRICS, Saudi Arabia, one of the #1 allies of the United States, joining BRICS, it's only a matter of time before the US dollar is dead. And it's literally a walking dead zombie. It's already dead, but it's still going because it's being artificially propped up. Because if they allow it to crash all at once, all these countries around the world that hold US dollars, which, by the way, is still the #1 held currency in the world by all the countries, but dropping every month, China's $2 trillion US dollars become toilet paper. So they have to lie about their gold reserves, and they want to keep the price of gold down right now so governments can keep acquiring it in secret, while they know the US dollar is going to collapse. And when the US dollar eventually collapses, Canada's dollar is going to collapse with it. And that's going to be the perfect excuse to bring out the digital currency. And that's why, another reason why I like a country like Mexico. Even though they're about to get their first female Zionist leader, because she's got all the money behind her and she's leading the polls, and she's going to try to bring in climate change, she's going to try to bring in massive immigration, and she's going to try to do a universal basic income there. In Mexico, less than 50%, around 50 to 60% of people only have a bank account, and less than 60% of the people have a credit card. Virtually every transaction in Mexico is done in cash. So it's going to be very hard to create the infrastructure and very hard to convince people to use anything digital in Mexico. So while Canada is way past its prime, looking over the edge of the cliff, and your life is guaranteed to get worse every single year from now, a country like Mexico and other countries like Mexico still have decades of prosperity left as they're on the increase. So I implore every Canadian that has the means and ability to get out while you can, do your research, find which country works for you, and start a new life there. Because if you stay in Canada, not only is your life going to get worse every year from now, your kid's future compared to yours is going to be completely bleak and eliminated.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, as I said, this man is fearless. Nothing stops Chris Sky. Man, I hope you can punch as fast as you can talk, because either way, that opponent of yours is going to come up bloodied and bruised if he gets up at all. So congratulations on that. Let us know when that's on. We'll live stream it in Australia, and maybe we'll put a bit and a few pencils down here. Now, oh man, so much to cover there. Look, just on the China gold. There are gold mines in Australia. The Chinese are gripping the gold straight out of the ground and shipping it straight into China. And our politicians, that's unlawful. We know that. But this has been going on since forever. And so we're suffering almost identically everything you are. We've already, the digital ID's already been passed by our parliament. So we're ahead of you in one point there, which is nothing to be proud of. But by and large, ladies and gentlemen, please go back and listen to what Chris just said, because that is an excellent summary of what has gone through Australia or will come to Australia very, very shortly, unless we stand up. Now, I hear your advice on getting a few passports. I used to have a couple. Not anymore. I'm digging in here. We're the rats of Tobruk, and we're in Australia. We're not going anywhere. We're staying and fighting. They're going to die for their country, and we're going to help them, metaphorically, of course, because I'd hate to, encourage violence. But having said that, the good news here is that the term "rip the Band-Aid off" is starting to grab more attention across the country. There is a real taste. Australians, like Canadians, are just good people, polite people. We don't start fights, but by Christ, we can finish them if we need to. And the feeling we're getting in Oz is that more and more people are starting to step up. More and more people are ready to start moving forward. Now, the man sitting next to me, John Wilson, former head of the Trades Hall in Canberra, senior unionist in Australia for decades and decades, the last made man, the last real communist. He knows where the bodies are buried, and that's not a metaphor. He's now on the side of good, and he is leading what he's calling the National Strike for Australia, the NSA. And it's a very intelligent, absolutely achievable objective. I'll let him talk about it, but it's the one thing that we know that can actually end the belligerent occupation. So, John, with that as an intro, please take Chris and the rest of the viewers, tell us the background to the strike, the philosophy behind it, because a lot of people won't know about it yet. And for those who do know, let us know how it's progressing and what's coming up soon.
Look, thanks, Rick. And Chris, great doing this session with you, mate. Thoroughly enjoyed your contribution earlier. Very, very engaging. Look, Chris, like Canada, here in Australia, the people have been very badly betrayed. Nearly every institution, every union, every church, all of it, mate, has badly betrayed our country, and we now have a nation of very traumatized people, and are doing it very, very rough. We have massive homelessness where I live up in Queensland. We've got massive hardship, massive homelessness, and as you've indicated, it's only going to get worse. It's only going to get worse, as bad as what it is right now. Now, the problem, Chris, is distilled down into basically two words, okay? Here in Australia, we have a belligerent occupation. We don't have government. We don't have any laws or any constitution here in Australia. What we have is some foreign powers, right? Foreign powers, central bankers, Zionist power bases, Fabian power bases, Freemasonic power bases. And what they've done is they have seized our country. They've seized the nation, and they are holding the nation at ransom. Now, to remedy that, Chris, I have a call for the only thing that I know how to remedy this situation. The only thing that's ever worked in this country for 200 years is big strikes. Big strikes have worked in Australia repeatedly in the last 200 years. When any big strikes have been executed, they've always led to a successful outcome. So that's what I've called for. I've called for a big strike here in Australia. However, it's the nature of the strike that had to be rethought very carefully, because all previous strikes that I've been involved in, Chris, is been on the basis of, we want what you have, right? We want more of what you have. Now, that's all the strikes that I've been involved in as a former lefty and a former big trade unionist. This strike is vastly different, which is, we don't want anything that you have. We don't want any of it. We want you to pack up and get the fuck out of our country and don't come back. That's the difference with this strike, Chris. And so I've had to re-engineer how I go about this strike. However, this strike is deadly serious. It's new. already. We're closing in on 10,000 signed up national strikers currently taking strike action right now. However, we're getting well over 100,000 people coming to our national strike pages and examining all of our information and spending time looking over all the information. So, Chris, the national strike is now up and running. It's in its infancy. It's been really well supported, and it's got legs. It's got legs. Now, what is now up for discussion, what is now on discussing this matter behind the scenes, okay, is the launching of a new national trade union here in Australia, a new national trade union, because eventually we want to get to the point in our national strike actions of withdrawing labour, okay, withdrawing labour, okay. So we're going down. That is the path of resistance that I am putting in place and organising. I have a lot of experience and skill in doing this type of action. I've taken governments on before, all the while from the left. This is what I'm saying here, Chris, all the while from the left. And I now hate these left. I now hate the communists. I now hate the left. I now hate all of this stuff and can't forgive them. And I've been a lonely person for 11 years now as a former national trade union figure whose father and brothers and whole family have got life membership inside of their individual trade unions, right? I held one of the most senior positions here in Australia for 3 years as the former president of Trades Hall here in Canberra, as well as the secretary of the biggest construction union here in Australia, okay? So I have been a very lonely figure standing up against this rape, pillaring, plundering and mass murder of my country. I'm being very lonely, but I'm trying to make a contribution and to turn this around by doing things that I know how to do. And I'd love your support in the future for the stuff we're working on. Okay, so Rick, that's where we're up to. We're putting up a fight in Australia, and we're coming back. Okay, thank you.
Well,
thank you, Rick. And
I think when people see I think when people that are involved with your movement see the debate happen in Canada, and I lay everything out like I just laid it out on this show, and it's going to be a few months from now, so some of the things will have already happened. I think you guys are going to see an explosion of interest with people that want to support your movement, and that's why I've always said united non-compliance has to have go way beyond international borders, and we have to work together to create the phase 2, which is taking action, which we are both doing in our own way, and we are both doing in a way that will complement each other. Because our biggest problem with COVID, we did take action, we did get our mandates removed when we did a little something called the trucker convoy, but we did not do the most important part of united non-compliance, which is phase 3, holding these people accountable. And that is why they are so brazen and so bold, and we're doing everything right in front of our faces, right in the open, because they literally injected people with poison, killed people, shut down their businesses, made them stay home, make them wear a mask. And not one person has been arrested. Not one person has been charged. Not one person has been punished. And that's what needs to change. When the governments fear the people, we have freedom. When the people fear the governments, we have tyranny, and we are seeing it firsthand. So I believe your idea is fantastic because Australians are known for their striking. And I believe the information that I can provide in Canada, which is basically happening in tandem in Australia, is going to really make your movement thrive. I wish I could say that I believe Canadians would have the similar type of movement, but they are so in denial. Nobody wants to believe what's happening. And if I tell them, they get mad at me like I'm the one doing it to them. And Canadians literally would rather believe the nice lie than the harsh truth, and rather be giving up their livelihood and their freedom and their prosperity and their future little by little by little, so they could keep telling themselves, oh, it's going to get better. Oh, it's like this everywhere. And I've heard the same 4 or 5 lies that people tell themselves from virtually millions and millions of Canadians. We have a very big problem with brainwashing and social engineering here in Canada. So hopefully we can help each other. Hopefully my information and Canada being used as an example can get your guys' strike going like crazy, and then your strike can have some real tangible results, and Canadians will actually learn something, and so will the rest of the world. That's why I believe this debate is going to be so important, because it might not be able to save Canada on its own, but it will wake up other countries and people that are creating movements like yours. It's going to give them the type of boost it needs. And then when people see that you can be successful, all the countries in the world will realize that they can do the same thing. And we can finally finish what we started with COVID, the global awakening of billions of people, taking action of billions of people, and finally holding these so-called politicians, health officials, and everybody else accountable for their actions. Because once we do, then we can finally replace them with people that will be honest, people that will do what we want them to do, what is in our best interest. So we are not lost yet, and I'm very happy I did this show, because I believe that your strategy is going to be the winning strategy, because Australians have a lot more fight in them than Canadians. They just need to be given the right information and the right fire under their ass. And I believe I can provide that for you guys.
Hey, Chris, listen, let me just finish by saying this, brother. The biggest obstacle that I've had in the last several months mobilising this national strike, and you must understand, mate, it's going viral here in Australia. I've just finished doing a road trip out into regional Australia. It's the first time they've heard of it, and they love it. They love it. But the biggest problem we have in the freedom movement in Australia is that it's fully infiltrated by gatekeepers. It is fully infiltrated by gatekeepers, and they do not want this strike to be successful, and they're trying to suffocate it, brother. So any help from our brothers and sisters from in Australia and around the world to publicise it and support it is warmly welcome, and it's a truly organic movement. This is truly an organic movement, okay?
I believe you, and we have the same problem in Canada. We have the infiltrators like Jeremy McKenzie that are telling people everything's going to be fine, telling people that he's raising an army of hundreds of people that are going to cause this revolution. And that is why I'm doing this debate, to expose people like that, nullify people like that, and allow both of our different types of information and types of action to merge together and to help each other out. Because believe me, no one's going to believe you're infiltrators when every single thing I say starts to happen, just like it did with COVID. That's going to wake people up. And when they see that they actually have a chance, and when they see that you actually have the numbers and the actions you need, and when the rest of the world sees Australia standing up for themselves because they don't want to end up like Canada, I believe we can create a massive worldwide movement of billions of people.
Good on you.
It's a joy to hear you say that, Chris, because the Australians are waking up. The media is beginning to report the news that actually hits home. 500 million people globally are either dead or injured from the vax. And we had an example, and this is just one example of many, but there's a gentleman down in Melbourne, Victoria, southernmost mainland state, southeast corner of the country, went into a restaurant, and the restaurant said, we only take card. And he had the cash in his pocket, and he wasn't going to pay card, but he intended to pay, so nothing illegal. Legal tender is called legal tender because it's illegal. You are required to accept forms of exchange. Now, so he ate his meal, and this only happened a couple of days ago. He ate his meal and then went to pay, and they said, well, you've got to do it on a card. And he said, well, I don't have card. Here's the exact money in cash, and we don't take that. He said, well, I'm not paying by card. Here's the cash. And there was a bit of a contretemps. And so the police were called. The gentleman went outside, had a cigarette. Cops turned up, and he explained, I'm not trying to do a runner. Here's the exact money. They're not taking my money. It's legal tender. The police explained to the proprietor, you must accept that money. And then the customer also required a receipt and for taxation purposes. And then the restaurateur said, well, we can't do that because it's not in the system. He said, I don't care. You've got to give me a receipt. So they hand wrote a receipt. Anyway, he wandered out of the restaurant, successful, and the coppers who were called sidled up to him and said, well done, mate, we need more people like you in this country. So it is turning. It has been turning for a long time now. Now, what I like about what we're doing here in Oz, we're dovetailing. What John is doing is dovetailing with what Australia One is doing. It's a 1-2 punch, and you do a 1-2 punch well, your adversary goes down. So what John's doing, he's mobilizing the country. He's going to give them something tangible that they can do and get a result from, like not paying their council rates, for example, because councils are the most hated institutions in this country, and that gets everybody's attention. They might not see the big picture. They might not be interested in the big picture. But if we can get their attention, and John's doing that with his very intelligently phased in national strike actions, so he gets their attention. He's the left jab. And then that dovetails because Australia One will be now arranging briefings that John can run around the country. Every Australia One group will be briefed. Get as many people in as you can, and John will come to you and brief you what's going on. Now, what A1 is doing, and this is critical because it's one thing to win the fight, you got to win the peace. John's going to win the war, and A1 wins the peace because we have to prepare, and we have been for years now, preparing the people to take control of their nation. Because it's one thing to say, I'm sovereign, I want to rule myself. But they can't.
You need a government that works for the people.
They can't do anything, but that's the whole purpose of it. So we've been training up the people to step up, and our philosophy is to decentralize political power to the lowest possible level. It's the only way that we can guarantee that this will never happen again. And so this is just a brilliant piece of strategy. I love it. It's elegant. It's going to win without a doubt. And so we're going to win the war with the national strike, and we're going to win the peace with Australia One, devolving and decentralizing political power to the lowest possible level. So we're going to introduce counties where they get to run their county. And in learning how to run the county, they will then learn how to run a state. And then learning how to run a state, they're going to learn how to run a whole nation. Now, this is going to take time because Australians, like Canadians, like most people around the world in the democracies who are unaccustomed to formal tyrannies or declared tyrannies, they become so demoralized, they no longer know how to do this. What was bread and butter ideas when I was a kid, and I'm 64, so I've been around the buoy a few times. What was bread and butter to us is now some exotic meal to the average Australian today. They have no clue. They don't know what good looks like. That's the problem. They have no clue what good looks like. They don't know what good morality looks like. They don't know what good sovereignty looks like. They don't know what good self-reliance looks like. They don't know the benefits of a Western Christian democracy. They just don't know. And so we've got this slow journey, and it's okay. We're good with that. We understand it. This is a multi-generational solution to a war that, you know, Chris, has been fought for millennia by the same evil bearing a different name. And so this 1-2 combination that John's national strike has got and we've got with A1, this is the blueprint for national success and hopefully international. Have a look at us, see what we're doing, replicate it, change it for your circumstances, because every country is different. But we've got the blueprint, we're driving it, and we're not going anywhere. As I said, we're going to be like the rats of Tobruk, except we're the rats of Australia. We're going to dig in, and they're not going to get us out with a can opener. So we're pretty optimistic. Hard work to be done. We call it the great labours of peace. You know, the other people have got the tribulations of war, but our responsibility is the great labours of peace. It'll take generations. We won't see all of the benefits that we have done, but as every wise man and woman does, they will plant a seed, knowing they'll never sit in the shade of that tree, but their children and their grandchildren will do, and that's what we're doing. So we're very optimistic here in Oz. A lot of work, but we're very optimistic. We're in good shape. We're in very good shape. Before we go, I'd like just a quick rundown, Chris. Your other countries you've visited, I'd be interested to take your just a quick opinion on countries that are doing it well and doing it badly. What's the rest of the world doing, just to help us get an understanding of the temperature out there?
Well, I think anybody can agree that all the so-called Western countries, Canada, US, Australia, New Zealand, and Europe, are the most under attack. And I had a very similar, in the UK, I had a very similar situation. People don't even realize this, but in London, over 50% of establishments no longer accept cash. And I was completely like dumbfounded. I'm like, what do you mean you don't accept cash? I just ate breakfast. I'm like, do you want the money or not? And they didn't call the police on me or anything. They just took the money, thank God. But that's when I opened up my eyes that this is definitely a global attack. It's further along in Canada than elsewhere because we have a lot of conditions that make us weaker. And the real problem is we don't have anybody like you two that have actually come up with a tangible solution. Because even if we did have two carbon copies of you guys in Canada, Canadians are just not on that level yet. And that's what I'm trying to do, bring them up to that level so that movements like yours can take hold and flourish. And like you said, they didn't get us here overnight. It took decades, it took generations. But we can fix the problem a lot faster than it was for them to destroy us. And that's all we got to do. I believe in everything you guys just said. I'm actually much more optimistic now for the future of Australia than I was 5 minutes ago. And the countries that people need to go to are countries that, when I went to Mexico 20 years ago, it was a shithole. Like, I went there on vacation. I was like, wow, look at this friggin' place. But you go there today and it's like, they have way better weather than Canada. They have a way better food supply than Canada. You're surrounded by actually people that were born there and care about their countries. And I'm Italian, they're Mexican. So we have a very similar language, very similar cultural heritage, very similar family values, very similar hospitable nature. So I fit in real well in Mexico. And everybody just needs to do their research and figure out what they're looking for. And you might find that Panama suits you, or Costa Rica suits you, or Dominican Republic suits you, or Cambodia suits you. But all these supposed third world countries that don't have the technological infrastructure to enslave people like they do in the Western countries, and they don't have an apathetic population like they do in the Western countries, and they have a much lower cost of living than the Western countries. People always tell me, oh, I can barely get by in Canada with the money I make. How am I supposed to go somewhere else? Well, you're living in a place with one of the highest costs of living in the world. So if you take that money elsewhere, it's going to do much better. And it's just common sense, but common sense is no longer common. It's just sense, and it's uncommon. I believe they have to change the term of common sense and they have to call it uncommon sense from now on, especially in places like Canada. But you guys really inspired me today. And I'm looking forward to working with you. I'm looking forward to making you guys a big aspect of my debate and my discussions in the next few months leading up to the debate. And I truly believe that with our combination of my information and foresight with your national strike and your solution to the decentralized government, that's not just the 1-2 punch. That's the 1-2-3 knockout. And I'll do it physically first when I have the MMA fight, and then we'll do it metaphorically after the fact.
Oh man, I love your style, Chris. You are one in a million. I love it. We need more Chris guys on the planet. Before we go, look, I'd like to wrap up here, but just one thing. I like to tease our American cousins because I doff my hat to the founding fathers, what they created, and the example they presented to us. And it's up to us to take up the cudgel and pick up that baton and run with it ourselves in our own way in our own countries. And I know that that's what the US wants. They don't want to run the planet. They want us to run our countries, but we've got to be worthy of it. They have sacrificed a lot in blood and treasure, and we have to be worthy of that honor to run our own countries. But having said that, I've publicly said that we're going to have an influx of the United States citizens coming over here simply because it's a better place than the US is. This country is brilliant. You can come here from anywhere and become an Australian. My parents came here in '51 as a couple of kids. They met on board the ship, and everyone, it doesn't matter what your name is, what you look like, you can become an Australian. In fact, there's a story in Australian Special Forces, the 3 SAS Squadron, when they did one of their tours of Vietnam. SAS, of course, stands for the Special Air Service Regiment. But they made the joke that SAS stood for Spot the Aussie Squadron because there were so many people from so many different countries fighting in Australian Special Ops. But anyway, that's the nature of this country. We've got everything we need. We can throw walls up around the entire country, and we don't need the world because we've got everything we need here. But we're not going to do that, obviously. We're going to open the country up, and we're going to attract the best and the brightest from around the world. We're going to create the greatest country the world's ever seen, with due respect, of course, to our American cousins. But watch this space, guys. Now, before we go, would you like to wrap up, John? Any last comments at all?
Thank you, Rick, and thank you, Chris. Look, Chris, I just simply say this. As an old lefty, I was part of the problem in my younger years, okay? And I've made a lot of mistakes with my life. Now, I've now turned that around, and I am taking all of my learnings, all of my teachings, and every bit of left-wing tactical stuff that I've been taught, and I'm reapplying it back against the left. I'm reapplying it back against the globalist and the cabal. And the one thing that I know that works is national strikes. They work. I've done a lot of them in my day as the former president of Trades Hall Council, and this national strike is not only is it going to work, mate, we can already see the take up and the people embracing it, mate. It is working right now, and it's only going to grow. It's only going to grow. Love to work with you. I mean, no one knows John Wilson. No one's heard of me, and I accept that. But any help, any promo, anything like that, this is a truly organic rank and file movement. I swear, there's no factions. I'm not a member of any political party. I'm not a member of anything. It's really an organic national strike movement, and we're working with anyone at all who's prepared to work with us. And Rick Bosi and A1 have been rock solid in our corner, supporting the national strike, and we're very proud to work with him as well. Okay, so thank you, Chris. Look forward to working with you in the future.
Well, I'll end off with this. Most leftists are evil people. In your case, you are a victim of the road to hell is paved with good intentions, but you saw the way and you changed your direction. And I believe you're on the right track now. And if you send me all the information about what you're doing, my email's been out there the whole time. I'll do an expose on it on my Telegram. I'll let people know what's really going on. And like I said, I'm going to include it into the debate. And I just want to mention the United States real quick. They did something that a lot of people don't know. So Baton Rouge, Louisiana, was the least safe city in all of the United States. On a rating of 1 to 100, one being the worst, the crime rate was 1. And the population was 65% African American, 35% white American, but the 35% were paying almost 90% of the taxes for this hellhole to live in. So they decided that they wanted to create their own city, and they took it to the Supreme Court, and they've created a new city in Louisiana called St. George, and it's almost exclusively white. If we had tried to do something like that in Canada, we would be labeled racist, charged with hate crimes, and probably dragged off to gulags. But in the United States, they actually went along with it, and the Supreme Court gave them the right to do it. So there's a lot more freedom and a lot more tangible action happening in the United States. And each country or each state in the United States is almost like a different country. If you go to New York or California, you might as well be in Canada. If you go to Texas or Florida, it's an entirely different country. And I think that's amazing, but I think they're also going to be vulnerable because of that. I think the United States is heading for a second civil war. And I would love to do everything we can to avoid that from happening and have a peaceful resolution. And the first peaceful resolution that I've seen that looks like it can actually be applied worldwide is YouTube. So I want as much information on what you're doing as possible emailed to me so I can study it very thoroughly and I could be one of the proponents of it. And as you can see, I'm pretty good at explaining things in ways that people can understand it. And I believe that if we all work together, we can literally save the world.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I think we're in great shape. We've got Chris Sky saving Canada. Man, you're a one-man army. I love it. You can think and you can fight, and that's a great combination to have. We've got Trades Hall communists and an ex-special forces soldier working together to bring the country to a standstill with a strike. How incredible is that? And then decentralized political power to the people. What a strange world we live in. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Ricardo Bosi, National Leave Australia 1. I'd like to thank Chris Sky and John Wilson, our guests today. Thank you for attending. We'll see you next time.
Love you guys. Honestly,